Before we started this morning, Roy was jesting with me that Shabbat Gadol is the Shabbat when rabbis have a great deal to say. Rabbis always have a great deal to say. We just restrain ourselves. And part of the joke was that on Shabbat Gadol, rabbis would tell their congregants everything they needed to know about getting ready for Pesach. I think that's actually a myth, because by Shabbat HaGadol, if you don't know what to do to get ready for Pesach, it's too late. And Dafka, in years like next year, when Shabbat HaGadol is actually Erev Pesach, mamish, it's too late. So I don't think it actually has to do with length or with the massive amount of information that one needs to get ready for Pesach. So what makes Shabbat HaGadol Gadol? I'd like to suggest that Shabbat HaGadol is the Shabbat in which we confront big issues, big questions. I've got to admit, I have found it challenging to get ready for Pesach this year. In a way, Purim was easy, because for Purim, I parked all the trouble over here. But Pesach is all about redemption and freedom and liberation. And we are living in a moment where those feel threatened. In recent weeks, I have read stories, and I'm sure some of them have crossed your computer screens as well. So one of them that stuck with me is a story about the Seder that is going to be held in Hostage Square in Tel Aviv. So you know that in Tel Aviv they set up a table with an empty table set, completely ready, missing only the people. And as hostages have been released, they've shrunk it down. But this year, over 500 members of Kibbutz Be'eri will gather there to celebrate Pesach. These are people who are still not home. They are spread throughout the country in hotels and in guest houses. But 500 will gather in Tel Aviv at Hostage Square, along with some of the members of their kibbutz who have actually been able to come home, and they will celebrate Pesach in the shadow of emptiness. Residents bring with them people who are absent. There's one young woman, Ella Ben Ami, whose father, Ohad, remains captive, but she celebrates next to her mother, who was released some months ago. And for them, the sense of dissonance between redemption and liberation is powerful and palpable. A classmate of mine, Danny Gordis, you may know him from Times of Israel. He's written a few books, but he and I were classmates in rabbinical school. So he was at Columbia as an undergrad. I was at Columbia as an undergrad. We never met as undergrads. But He shared the following story a few days ago. On April 17th, he writes, "I was flying back from New York City to Tel Aviv. When I got to check-in, Natan Sharansky was right behind me. And after catching up a little bit, we got to talking about whether the flight would actually leave, since there were rumors that Iran might strike Israel and that the flight might be canceled. Would they allow a plane to take off knowing that something was going on?" Skip ahead. A few minutes later, he writes, "I saw Rachel and John Goldberg-Polin, parents of Hirsch, who has been held hostage after being grievously wounded on October the 7th. Hours later, somewhere over the Atlantic, I looked up and saw that Natan had gone over to stand in the aisle next to John's seat and was bent over in intense conversation with John. I obviously have no idea what they were talking about, and it was not my business. But I couldn't help but be struck by the unbelievable heaviness of Jewish history that was held in the image of that conversation. Natan Sharansky, liberated after years in a Soviet prison, often in solitary confinement. And there was John, whose son is now in prison, not yet liberated, and whose fate God only knows. There, standing next to each other, was a story of redemption and liberation, and a story desperate for redemption and liberation. He ends by saying, "At a certain point, I looked down at my laptop again, because even watching them talk was too much to bear." This captures Pesach for us this year. That sense of, I'm free. And all of the liberty that comes with it is now held captive in Gaza. All my sense of freedom and comfort that I've enjoyed is this year held captive by concerns for what goes on college campuses for our students. We lived a golden era in America. This was the land of freedom, of liberty, where Jews felt comfortable. And perhaps we were deluding ourselves, because the roots of everything that's happening now were always here. And I can't help but think back to our ancestors who lived in Spain. And we hear historians talk about the golden age of Spain, of Shmuel and Nagid, and so many more who flourished and thrived. But they had a suspicion that it was ephemeral. When Yehuda Halevi, one of those living during the golden age of Spain, writes, "Libi b'mizrach v'ani b'sof ma'arav." My heart is in the east and I am at the end of the west. That's not someone who feels safe. That's not someone who feels content. That's someone who feels that the bubble is going to burst. That the comforts of the present are no guarantee for the future. So this year, perhaps in a way that we have not felt in a long time, we feel like we can truly step into that verse in the Haggadah that says, you should feel that you are free, that you should know what it's like to be enslaved and liberated. Know that if our freedom is truly to matter, we can't wait for the Holy One to act, but we have to act on our own behalf and on behalf of our brethren all around the world. We need to be strong voices in the ears of our leaders around the world. Perhaps we saw a glimmer this week. Who would have thought, given the discussion and the rancor that has roiled for months, support that Israel would receive when it was attacked by Iran? And yes, it was nice for the United States and the UK and the EU. But Jordan, Saudi Arabia, other Arab countries, unthinkable a generation ago, maybe a decade ago. But that came with a lot of hard work. The task and the responsibility continues to fall on our shoulders. Advocate, to demand, to insist that freedoms be granted for all, so that the citizens, the residents of Kibbutz Be'eri can go and celebrate Pesach at home next year. That they won't be far-flung and spread wide across the country. That next year, Natan and John can share stories of liberation and reunification with family. That the weight of history will lift itself once more.